Borthakur IAS Academy. Prostuti aru adhyayanor nirbhorjogyo thikona. Borthakur IAS Academy.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Hindu analysis for 5th July 2021. Let us begin with the first article today. Jammu and Kashmir administration bans drones in Srinagar. Now, as I said earlier, the district administration of the Air Force, where the Air Force station was located, banned usage of drones. Now the entire Jammu and Kashmir administration has banned usage and having possession of drones illegal. What does it mean? It means that if anybody is in possession of a drone, they might be attract police action or legal action initiated against them. Currently, they have given time to people who own drones to deposit them in the nearby police station and get a receipt for same, stating that I have submitted my drone and the police are in possession of my drone right now. And if it is a private person, he has to deposit in the police station, nearby police station. And if it is a government entity who are doing or who are using drones to conduct surveys or reconnaissance or damage assessment or whatever it is, they have to take prior permission of the local police and inform them of their flight path and everything and so on and so forth. So this is where we are talking about. See, the Jammu and Kashmir police issued this order under section 144 of CRPC. The problem with this or such kinds of action are these are not the long-term solutions to the current problem. We need more solutions that doesn't involve banning the entire drone, having drones or possession of drones is liable under sections of law. That is what we were discussing about earlier when the Jammu and Kashmir, not even the district administration came out with such ban orders. So again, as far as this investigation is concerned, it is going on, it is still ongoing, nothing is 100% defined or conclusive as it. But nonetheless, I think this is a stopgap arrangement that the government of Jammu and Kashmir had come up with to necessitate or to prevent future attacks. But again, nobody who is willing to function under the law will carry out such attacks. It is the people who operate outside the law that carry out such attacks. But nonetheless, this is one step that the government of Jammu and Kashmir or the administration of J&K have taken in order to at least mitigate such drone attacks in the future. So that is something that we have to think in order to give certain some resemblance of solutions when answer writing or when you face such similar situations when you are posted in some place or other. Moving on to the next article, Taliban captures several districts in Afghanistan. In what has been predicted since the announcement of troop withdrawal by the United States, everybody understood that the moment the troop withdrawal of US happens, Taliban is going to gain upper hand over the Afghan National Security Forces. So now we have confirmation that Taliban is marching through northern Afghanistan and has gained momentum in a single night by capturing several districts in certain provinces, and because of that we are seeing fleeing of Afghan forces, meaning they are abandoning their posts and are fleeing from that positions. So one of the things that we are seeing right now, according to these sources, is that the Afghan security forces who were supposed to defend those positions have now abandoned those positions and they have fled to other borders, particularly Tajikistan. They have crossed the border into Tajikistan and are trying to escape the Taliban. And it seems that the Taliban have captured key districts from Kandahar after a fierce fighting with the security forces. Now this is just 2 days after both United States and NATO forces vacated the main Bagram air base near Kabul and handed it over to the Afghan security forces. According to conservative estimates, this is not even the effective exact number. According to conservative estimates, Taliban now effectively controls third of all 421 districts and their district centers in Afghanistan. As a result of this, people who were either supporting the US forces or Afghan security forces or were labeled as US supporters or Afghan security forces are being sought out by Taliban and are being either punished or killed or arrested. As a result of this, with the addition of fleeing of security forces who were supposed to protect these civilians, families are fleeing these regions where Taliban is gaining foothold. So that was the worry, and we are seeing translating into action. One of the biggest worry that many of the experts or even the governments, including India, is worried about is Afghanistan falling into the trap of a civil war, an unending civil war that is detrimental to both Afghan-led peace process and India's interest in Afghanistan. So moving on to the next article, families flee as Taliban seize key districts. Now Taliban has effectively captured Kandahar, Badakhshan. Particularly now they have captured the southern province of Kandahar, that is Panjwai district, which used to be controlled by Afghan government forces and Afghan government. Now after a fierce fighting, that too a single night, one night time fierce fighting, Panjwai district is now captured by Taliban. Now as a result of this, many families are fleeing from this area. Now the fall of Panjwai is a critical component or a critical step towards the complete control of Taliban, because Kandahar used to be the head of operations for Taliban leadership. Now, with the help of United States Special Forces, NATO air support, and Afghan security forces, and various other countries' special forces, NATO and supporting forces were able to take control of these districts from the clutches of Taliban. But after the withdrawal of US troops and so on and so forth, we are now seeing the same regions that were captured by the security forces, international coalition of security forces, whom took heavy losses when they were wrestling for supremacy in this region, have effectively fallen back into the hands of Taliban. Now, this is again a problem in terms of the overall scenario of Afghan security and Afghan security forces. See, when you see more than 300 of your own security forces fleeing and abandoning their posts because they could not hold on or could not push back the Taliban forces, it's a morale hit for Afghan security forces and a morale boost for Taliban fighters. On the one hand, these people are losing territory, on the other hand, they are gaining territory. Now, when you see hundreds of Afghan army personnel, police and other troops surrendering their outposts and fleeing to other provincial capitals, or even cross border into Tajikistan and try to surrender there, it poses a lot of questions as to, is the Afghan National Security Force capable enough to take care or hold on to territory that they have right now. As far as the Afghan National Security Forces, there are many challenges in the forces itself. As far as what I am seeing and what I am reading, right now the only force that is capable and can actually counter Taliban is the Afghan Special Forces. But their numbers are far less. Afghan Special Forces are trained by American Special Forces, but their job is not to hold on to territory. Their job is to carry out surgical strikes, pinpoint eliminations, and so on and so forth. But it seems that there are certain challenges in the Afghan National Security Army or Afghan National Security Forces itself in holding on to territory. And as a result, fearing the repercussion from Taliban, because Taliban might label these people and these families as sympathizers to Afghan government or American troops, they might harm these people or even lynch them or kill them. You know how this goes. So they are running out of their own houses once again because of the regain of control by Taliban. Now, one of the key factors that Afghan government has been trying to incorporate into fighting or holding on to territory is the resurgence of militias. See, once US troops and Afghan security forces were capable enough, the government disbanded any militias that operated out of these provinces. Now, in order to support Afghan security forces, the Afghanistan government is trying to resurrect the militias that they disbanded earlier. But the problem with militias are they don't operate within the rules of engagement. If an Afghan security forces personnel find a person who is accused of being a Taliban fighter, they arrest him and they send him for investigation. But if a militia group or a militia battalion finds a person who is accused of being Taliban fighter, they tend to shoot them then and there. They don't conduct investigation, they don't arrest them. Just because somebody is being accused of being a Taliban fighter, they tend to shoot them, and that was happening earlier, and because of such actions they had to be disbanded and other human rights violations also. But it seems like the Afghan government is left with no other option but to resurrect the disbanded militias. So that is the current situation in Afghanistan. As far as the Indian component is concerned, the Taliban leadership or the political head of the Taliban grouping are all saying the right things to allay Indian fears. But remember, there is a disconnect between certain groups among themselves in the Taliban themselves. So nothing is concrete yet. Neither Indian government confirms nor denies our engagement with Taliban, but nonetheless all sources do indicate that we are engaging with Taliban. And from that perspective, we earlier few days back, I think we discussed how Taliban is looking for international recognition and political recognition, and India recognizing Taliban in negotiations or on the negotiation table is a win in Taliban's book. That's why they try to appease India at this point of time, because if India recognizes Taliban, then they get an ally who is not Pakistan. We discussed how almost all Taliban, 100% of Taliban hate Pakistan, but not 100% of Taliban groups or Taliban leaders have that kind of feeling towards Indians or India. They have indifference towards us because we never try to upend them. So again, this is quickly developing story. This is turning into something that might potentially be a question in either prelims or in mains. So we have to keep track of what is going in Afghanistan. Moving on to the next article, IB sounds alert on Bangladeshi nationals. We discussed about how migrants coming from Bangladesh, Rohingya migrants and illegal migrants coming into India has become a problem from both national security perspective and other paradigms also. But what is worrying security agencies is their ability to come up with fake documents, their ability to come up with fake identity cards with addresses in local areas wherever they are staying. If they are staying in Bengaluru, they have addresses in Bengaluru. If they are staying in Hyderabad, they have addresses in Hyderabad. If they are staying in any other place, they have addresses from those respective states. Now, when these people were arrested recently, they gave out information stating that not only these people, many others crossed into India through roads illegally, and the security forces are worried that if not all of them, at least some of them might be sleeper cell agents for terrorist organizations or banned outfits and might be used to wage war against India or carry out terror attacks. So this is the current situation in terms of migrants. As we discussed earlier, security agencies are worried, like cities like New Delhi, Bengaluru, Chennai, Hyderabad, Goa and other cities, particularly Kolkata, where high number of Bangladeshis are clandestinely staying, meaning illegally staying, and they are escaping Bangladesh due to poor conditions and in search of work, and are crossing and entering India illegally. But the problem is that when they come from that kind of families and that kind of financial dearth, terrorist organizations might recruit them to carry out their operations in India. So again, this is again a recent development in long list of events that were happening since the Rohingya issue started in Bangladesh. Myanmar, sorry, not Bangladesh, Myanmar. And from that point onwards, the discussion regarding illegal migrants have been at the forefront. So that is why we are discussing this article. Moving on to the next article, the problem now with the military synergy plan. So we know how the armed forces are negotiating to come up with a unified theatre commands. Earlier, the operation procedure was that Air Force, Navy and Army operated independently in their own silos. When the current government came into power, they started talking about unification of those silos and establishment of communication channels between tri-forces, that is Army, Navy and Air Force. And that is why they created the Chief of Defence Staff position. And since then, plans have been set into motion to unify all the theatre commands into 3 or 4 theatre commands, meaning in a single theatre command component, Navy, Army and Air Force unit train, work and deploy and are deployed together to ward off any eventualities or to conduct surveillance operations and to conduct patrolling operations. Now, the idea of having unified command structure in India has been facing a lot of problems because the differences that each of our tri-forces have. The negotiations have been going on since long, but nothing could be conclusively finalized. With that thing happening, the Prime Minister office decided that they might get involved into these discussions to get this thing sorted out, because this has been going on since long. And with the current security scenario at the forefront, either with the Pakistani side or with the Chinese side, the Prime Minister office felt that it might be right time to give the talks a nudge so that a final conclusive unification plan is agreed upon. But with that push came certain differences between our own armed forces to the surface, where the army head was quoted saying that the Air Force role in this new domain or this new multi-domain operation structure or doctrine would be of supportive role to the army operations. It can only be said that the army chief's words did not go down well with the Air Marshal of India, where he went on to a news show and clearly said that he doesn't see Air Force as a supportive role. Actually, he sees Air Force as a dominant and the tip of the attack force. So that is political, that is their opinion, that is statement, but nonetheless we are not going to discuss about that. What we are going to discuss today is why we are having certain difficulties in establishing unified theatre commands. The problem is, it is historical. See, it cannot be underscored at any point of time the importance of bringing synergy in operations in all three services. Because when you unify the three services of armed forces, it both economizes, meaning it reduces costs, it reduces duplication costs, it reduces equipment costs, it reduces multiple. It is economically very viable to unify all three services. Not only that, it is also very practical and it is actually effective in cases of conflict. Now, it cannot be disputed that both Indian military and other forces, Indian military encompasses all the forces, so it works in silos like all government agencies in India. Nobody communicates with other. Even among themselves also they don't communicate properly. One department doesn't communicate with other department, and that is how things have been, and we know how bad things are when it comes to response. Our response has always been knee-jerk reaction to issues rather than preventive. So this article is written by former Air Marshal himself, who is retired. He is a retired fighter pilot. He is a decorated fighter pilot. He is the recipient of Veer Chakra, and this article compounds the ethos of Air Force, meaning Air Force sees itself as the first force in defending, or the primary force, or the ace up the sleeve of Indian armed forces to counter any threats. That is well and good. That is how the morale should be. But when you talk about multi-domain operations, it doesn't mean that one force is superior than the other. It means that all forces work together. But nonetheless, this editorial is important to understand the perspective of how Air Force sees itself in overall scheme of things in India. Now, he argues that IAF is keen to bring in the requisite reforms to improve warfighting capabilities of Indian military as a whole while also economizing. That is absolutely true. But the problem is, when you compare or when you counter, when you are talking about countering China or effectively pushing back the Chinese, the advantage for Indian armed forces does not lie in either in land or in air. It is in the sea domain that India has advantage over the Chinese. The problem is, nobody is talking about that aspect or that component of countering the Chinese. What do I mean by that? When China wants to enter Indian Ocean region, Navy can, if given enough resources, can effectively block Chinese submarines, Chinese vessels, Chinese aircraft carrier entering into Indian Ocean region. Effectively, if given resources, Indian Army can create a link of, or can create a chain defense in the Malacca Straits and the subsequent Andaman and Nicobar Islands, that it prevents any Chinese vessel or submarine entering into Indian Ocean, thus preventing them from carrying out operations from Indian Ocean region against Indian assets or Indian continent. But the problem right now is, with the current resources in place, Navy though can put up a defense or put up a fence to prevent Chinese entering into the Indian Ocean region, but not with 100% certainty. When the standoff with the Chinese started late last year, the biggest worry that defense strategists were worried about was that this might force the government of India to take away critical resources that were being allocated to the naval forces away from them to the armed forces, that is army. and that has been pretty much true. Whatever the budget allocations that were going to be given to naval branch of Indian military were slightly diverted towards the fulfill critical gaps of Indian Army and to greater extent Indian Air Force. So that is the problem here. That is the core solution that we are not talking about. But nonetheless, Air Force does see itself as the, as I said, primary force that can deter Chinese aggression in Ladakh area and other areas also. Now, the author of this article argues that in the current formulations and current discussions regarding theatre commands, IAF, Indian Air Force have essentially been due to, or whatever the objections that IAF are rising is due to the air power being seen as adjunct to two surface forces, that is Army and Navy. The problem is, I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to comment on it. So what this effectively means is that our armed forces or our tri-services do not have a consensus regarding theatre commands, because everybody sees themselves and have been operating independently in respect of the other force. Now when you talk about unification of forces, it means that somebody might have to take a backseat in certain scenarios, and it seems that none of the forces are willing to take the backseat. Remember, the negotiations are still going on, the discussions are going on, the Prime Minister office itself is involved into the negotiations because it is a matter of national security and utmost importance. But as far as the theatre command structure itself, nothing is set in stone because nobody is agreeing on anything right now. Though this might look trivial on the surface, this is actually a matter of concern when you look at it from a strategical point of view. When your adversaries have almost similar capabilities than you, one adversary has similar capabilities like you, and the adversary is having superior numbers compared to you, though lacking in experience, but numbers do make a tilt in warfield or during a conflict. So this is actually a little bit that we should be concerned about, and one should hope that whatever the past or whatever the present whatever the past has been, tri-forces do come to an agreement and the theatre commands are realized as fast or as soon as possible. So since I am not an expert in this, I am not going to try to give up a solution. I try to present what I understand of the situation. So until and unless I have more understanding of the subject itself, and when I have, I'll try to explain what is the inner workings of theatre commands. Moving on to the next article, 4 years on delay derails railways CCTV project. So it has been 4 years or more than 4 years or so when Indian Railways signed a memorandum of understanding with RailTel for installation of surveillance cameras across all 983 railway stations in the country. Now, the railways initiated this project under Nirbhaya Fund with the primary goal of enhancing safety and security of women passengers in railway stations. Now, with the recent audit, it looks like the entire project has been derailed. When the Central Vigilance Commission conducted an investigation on regards to the entire implementation of the project itself, they found serious irregularities in the tendering process, and the entire project, because of such irregularities, has been worthless. Now, instead of depending on the agreement or the MOU, the Ministry of Railways has decided that they are directing their general managers, that is the regional general managers, to go ahead and install video surveillance systems at their railway stations or under their control, depending on whether the project has been implemented or not, meaning the railways are taking effective control of their own installation process and they are going to install irrespective of what the Memorandum of Understanding says. Remember, the project was that they are going to install surveillance cameras, CCTV cameras at 983 railway stations across the country, and the project was estimated to cost anywhere between 500 to 600 crores. Now it seems that the project, because of discrepancies and irregularities, has come to a complete stall. The project was supposed to be completed, I think, in 1 year or 2 years time, and in 2016 it was signed. The Memorandum of Understanding MOU was signed, and the project was supposed to be completed within a year's time or 2 years conservatively. So the project did not even materialize because allegations were made during the tender process itself. Tenders were floated for 4 regions in 2016 by the Railtel, but the project could not take off because allegations were made during the tendering process that certain irregularities were taking place, and CVC was entrusted with the investigation to be conducted, and after detailed inquiry they revealed that certain conditions in the tendering document were ambiguous, and many more ambiguities were found, and it's found that the notice and the documents that were uploaded to the tendering site or the e-bidding site even before approval from the competent authorities were given. So that's the issue. The project, which was supposed to be implemented all over India to enhance the safety and security of women passengers. Mind you, this does not only help women and women passengers, it would actually improve the safety and security of railway stations in India, but due to irregularities it has failed. Moving on to the next article. Second wave hit young people significantly, says study. Now we are still in the second phase of COVID-19, but we are not at the peak of it. We are at the tail end of it. Now a study was conducted, particularly a government study. This is not a private study, this is a government study. They conducted by collecting information from various hospitals in India. Now they studied clinical profile of hospitalized COVID patients in both first and second wave of the pandemic. Now this study is throwing up new kinds of data that is worrying and to a greater extent scary. Now they conducted the study was conducted jointly by Indian Council of Medical Research and the All India Institute of Medical Sciences and the National Center for Disease Control, using the data collected under the flag of or the ambit of National Clinical Registry for COVID-19, NCRC. Now all this the study looked at data from patients who enrolled in 40 hospitals between September 1 and January 30 of 2020 to 2021. The number of patients that they studied included 18,000 or 19,000 individuals and 12,000 hospitalized patients, and in second wave they considered 6,900 patients who were enrolled in the National Clinical Registry for COVID-19 database. After going through data, they found that they have expressed concern that a greater percentage of young patients were found to be more affected during the second wave, and far higher mortality was seen in age groups except under 20 age group, meaning whoever were aged above 20, those age groups saw higher mortality rates compared to other age groups. This is what we have been talking about. The first wave affected elderly. The second wave seems to have affected the younger population. That is why the rational or the irrational fear that the third wave is going to affect children stems out from. But all scientific data, all scientific modeling, all scientific predictions do point out to the fact that second wave was the worst that could have happened to India. Whatever the outcomes that we saw in the second wave might not be seen in the third wave. We are going to experience a third wave, but it is not going to be as worse and devastating as the second wave. But this study is important in terms of understanding which age groups were affected in the first wave and in the second wave. This study is important because it is conducted by the Government of India through its institutions, and data does seem to indicate that in the second wave, younger people aged above 20 were affected more than compared to other age groups. Particularly in the age groups between 20 to 39 experienced 23 to 26% in mortality rates or higher hospitalization rates, and in patients 40 to 60 age group increased from 40% of hospitalization to 41.3% hospitalization in second wave, and fewer patients who were over 60 years old were hospitalized in the second wave, because by the time we had begun our vaccination process, and people who were aged above 60 were the vulnerable group and were given vaccines in the first phase of our vaccination drive. So because of that and other prior development of immunities and whatnot, we were seeing less number of elderly people getting hospitalized in the second wave compared to what we saw in the first wave. So moving on to the next article, literacy numeracy mission deadline pushed to 2027. Now the central government came out with a new plan that ensures every class 3 child has foundational literacy and numeracy within 5 years, and they are trying to roll out this mission on Monday, that is today. The deadline for this mission to be materialized or realized was 2025. They said it so in the National Education Policy. They wanted 2025 to be the deadline to achieve the goal, and now, given the current circumstances due to COVID-19 and the disruptions that it had on the academic year and the educational system in India, the central government has decided to push back the target to 2026 and 2027 educational year, that is. Now the school education department is saying that no additional funding is being allocated for this national initiative for proficiency in reading and understanding and numeracy. Nipun Bharat is the scheme. They are not giving any more money to this Nipun Bharat scheme. Instead, money is being allocated to the flagship from the flagship program, that is Samagra Shiksha scheme, which actually saw a 20% drop in its budget this year. Again, certain schemes lost a huge chunk of their budget this year. Some schemes gained, but the critical schemes such as Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan or the Samagra Shiksha scheme and other schemes have lost budget in this financial year. Now, what is Nipun Bharat? The idea behind Nipun Bharat is to create an enabling environment to ensure universal acquisition of foundational literacy and numeracy, so that every child achieves the desired learning competencies in reading, writing and numeracy by the end of grade 3 by 2026 and 2027 educational year. Now, Nipun Bharat, though it is a central government scheme, state governments have a critical role to play, and it is up to state governments to emphasize goal setting and accountability, and central government is not going to play that much of a critical role in introducing this scheme. Now, the idea behind Nipun Bharat is not only the student component of it, the teacher component of the scheme is also significant, because through Nipun Bharat they will be providing guidelines to teachers, they will be training teachers, they will come up with new methodologies to assess students' education and the teachers' performance also. And they will be doing an overall restructuring of the course itself with the help of printed resources. And this seems to be a good scheme in terms of ensuring that people actually learn when they are in schools, particularly in government funded schools, because the percentage of literacy or numeracy or overall fundamental understanding of basics in that educational group or in that educational size of or chunk of population is very low, and that is why we are trying to address this issue. Because when a study was done as to understand what is the literacy of kids who are coming out of these institutions, they found it to be abysmally low, and in order to change that, they are adopting new schemes. Moving on to the next article, curbs on people without jabs is like house arrest. So the government of Mizoram came out with a standard operating procedure that prevented people who are not vaccinated coming out of their houses. So the Guwahati High Court found this particular standard operating procedure or rule, which doesn't allow people who are not vaccinated venturing out of their own houses, to be against their fundamental rights. They found that this particular rule of Mizoram government is equal to putting people under house arrest against the provisions of Article 14, Article 19 and Article 20 of the Constitution. Now the High Court says that the government must relook at this standard operating procedure rule. The High Court said that the standard operating procedure requires all persons to adhere to the protocols. There should not be any discrimination against the people who are vaccinated and people who are not vaccinated. So I found this particular rule in that operating procedure to be interesting, that on one side we are talking about our vaccine being left out of the green pass issue and how we shouldn't discriminate. And again, in India, we are trying to implement a similar kind of thing where we are trying to discriminate people. You have to understand there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed to take out vaccine hesitancy. But one possible solution is definitely not confining people into their own houses if they are not vaccinated. That doesn't help. That does more damage than helping the issue of vaccine hesitancy. So that is why I wanted to point out this article. Moving on, Chinese astronauts complete first spacewalk at new station. Now we know that the China has launched their first component of Tiangong, if I am pronouncing it wrong. We know that China has launched the first components of its Chinese space station, and as a part of completing that mission, Chinese astronauts successfully completed or conducted country's first tandem spacewalk. Tandem means two people doing it. Earlier spacewalk by the Chinese were done by solo Chinese astronauts. This is the first time that two Chinese astronauts ventured out of their capsule and carried out a spacewalk. They are constructing their Chinese space station. This is a major step in the Chinese space program, where they want to build their own space station to conduct their own scientific experiments They are trying to negotiate with Russia to leave International Space Station consortium and come and join them in this their own space station version of International Space Station. So this is a significant steps in terms of their own space program and having their own space station. India is still in the race because of COVID-19. Our first unmanned crew test flight or experimental flight of Gaganyaan was supposed to take place last June, but it was postponed to December of 2021. Now it looks like it has been again postponed to next year. So that is the current issue in terms of Indian space program and the Chinese space program. Please look into their Chinese space program, what is the their space station would be called or what it is called, and their flights and so on and so forth. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
Borthakur IAS Academy. প্রস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা।
Borthakur IAS Academy.